It's very important. Of course, they will go live right as I was fucking doing that. Yeah, of course it would.
All righty. Yep, of course it would. That's just the kind of person Rachel is, trying to steal the spotlight right from the beginning. Well, everybody, we want to thank you guys for joining in to GuildifyCon again. Today we have our panel talking about our characters' health, or mental health in writing. Sometimes they don't have regular health either, but we're talking about the mental health here of a character and their mental state of mind, how you guys formulate those, how you write them into there to make sure that everything is balanced out. Today with us we have Rachel, Travis, Daniel, and Sean joining us. We want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to come join us. We know that you all have busy schedules. You have uh, more books to write. There's people behind you cracking the whips all the time. Get those books out of there. We want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm going to give you each a chance here at the beginning and then once again at the end for anybody who comes in late to give a chance to plug in any of your work. Let us know where we can find you. Geneva's going to be nice enough to try to put those links up for us. So, Rachel, why don't you get us started with what you're working on and what you're excited about coming up?
So hi, my name is Rachel Nee Kirk. If you forget how to say it, just picture kneecapping Captain Kirk, and you have my surname. So I am currently working on the Knights of Eternity trilogy, which is going to be out next year, and I'm super excited about that. You can find me on Facebook on my author page, and I have wine, and I'm very excited. That was it. I didn't have anything else.
Thanks, Rachel. And Travis, how about we have you go next?
Okay. I'm Travis Deverill, author of He Who Fights with Monsters. I've got my next book coming out the end of next month. Still October, right? Yeah, I'm not that completely oblivious, but so I'm not doing anything special at the moment. I'm just writing away. My name is nothing like Captain Kirk, but I sadly look like very late stage William Shatner with less hair. But that's about it for me.
Is that why the red shirt?
No, the red shirt is because that was the first thing I came across in my cupboard this morning. But
all right, Daniel, how about we pass it off to you next?
My name is Daniel Shinhofen. I'm known for writing mostly lit RPG, game lit harem stories. So if you like multiple partner romances, I've covered that across my 50 some odd books over the last 7 years. For the mental health aspect that this panel is going to be focused on, I'm going to dip a little bit if my camera will work because I have technical difficulties. My Alpha World series, the main character that's the whole series. He's dealing with the mental health issues he had going into the game and trying to figure out what life is. And it's something that I don't think is touched upon enough in fiction. And I think at least one of the other authors here has been known for that. I'm not going to touch any shirts or loons on that, but, just so people are aware.
All right, thanks, Daniel. And Sean, we'll pass it off to you.
Great. So I'm Sean Oswald. I have I started with the series Life in Exile, which I actually really wrote as my own personal therapy while I was taking care of my grandfather who had dementia. He'd want me to stay up late with him, and I'd. It was fun. You could only watch so many episodes of Gunsmoke. So I asked myself this question: what would happen if I was Isekai but with my entire family? And Life in Exile began from there. Since then, I've got 40 books out in the last 3 years. They're just not as good as Travis or Daniel, so I have to write more of them. There you go. I really, really do enjoy this topic and looking forward to this panel. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. All right, digging into the heart of what we're talking about here, your main characters' mental health and how you make sure that you keep a balance in what they're supposed to be doing versus what they need to get done still, what they have done. So, a lot of times a character gets put into a situation where they're forced to kill, maybe for the first time, maybe for the first time in a long time, maybe they struggled with the ability to go through what they're going through. How do you make sure that your characters are not bland and just the same old blase, characters that you see time and time again come out in stories, movies, TV shows, whatever the case is, to make sure their personalities do mesh with a person and how they would normally feel like this person should be handling the situation versus acting like, Charles Manson was just set loose on the world that you're in. Rachel, why don't we start with you?
Well, first off, I want to say I am so fucking impressed with how many books you guys have written. Fair play. Oh my God. I have to catch up and I'll do my best. To go back to the question. So when I was approaching Nights, the thing I wanted is I have anxiety. I'm on medication for it. I love drugs. And what I really wanted when I was writing this series is usually when anxiety is in books, the person is a coward. They're really quite like nerdy or kind of off to the corner. They freeze in kind of desperate moments. And whereas I have always found that anxiety has a mom mode, is what I call it anyway. So when you're really anxious, when the spotlight's on you, you freeze up, etc. But if someone else is in trouble or something else happens, it's like it vanishes. And suddenly you can put yourself out there. And that's what I wanted in this. I wanted to write a cool, anxious character where when the focus is on her, she'll freak out. But when she has to put herself forward and help someone else, then it's almost like she has this brief moment when she trusts herself, then it fades even briefly before it all comes back in. And the other thing I wanted is a lot of people, they talk about the nervousness of anxiety, but they don't talk about how harshly you speak about yourself. The inner voice is one of the worst things in your head, and you call yourself awful fucking names. So I wanted a character that you saw more of what's going on in her head, but I didn't want to go to, because that can get really boring after a while. So I tried to keep that balance between she's in this world, she's got isekai, because of course it's a classic. She got isekai, and how do you deal with that while your brain is also calling you every single name under the sun? So that is something I wanted to make anxiety like not cool again, but like show it in a slightly different light. And I also wanted to show that added of like when you're put in stressful situations, some people freeze, but it helps other people because it gets them out of their own heads. So that was my approach with Nights of Eternity. I don't know if that answered your question, but I tried.
It absolutely does. Yeah, I appreciate that. Travis, you have been notorious for writing one of the least blasé and or predictable characters of all times. How do you make sure that you're putting your character in the right headspace when you go into that kind of writing?
Yeah, because across the course of my series, I've had my protagonist deal with quite a lot of different mental health issues, depending on what he happens to be going through at the start. And at the beginning, it's there's a lot of stuff going on. All this impossible stuff's happening. Questioning your own sanity. He ends up accidentally killing someone quite early, has a mental breakdown. So there's a lot of exploration of like trauma and the price of trauma. But there's also that balance in that, I'm ultimately writing what should be a mostly fun adventure story. So, I don't want to make it, sort of a maudlin exploration of the depths of what the mind does as it breaks down. So it does come down to that balance. But then, I sort of transition to a point where, you do acclimatize to that environment. And then he increasingly finds himself like, suffering, greater and more extreme traumas through the extreme situations. And I think that's where I explore a lot of it later on, where it comes down to, the reactions people have in extreme situations. And obviously it's all magic and, dragons and whatnot. So it's not directly analogous to what people go through, but I still think in the real world, but there's still, a lot of stuff to be found in, how people deal with extreme situations that we have, whether it's, sort of first responder situations or people going through, the trauma of violence in war. And I try to be authentic to that while still, maintaining that sort of fun adventure vibe. But, there are portions where I sort of go deeper into the trauma and the cost of that, which is, one of my major themes, which is probably why I ended up on this panel. But So it really does ultimately come down to balance. I do also try to be sensitive to this because in a lot of ways, this is me using mental health and trauma as sort of fodder for entertainment. So I always try to be respectful of that first.
Yep, that completely makes sense, and I applaud you for making sure that you are finding that balance in there, and not just, you know, terrible things for the sake of terrible things kind of writing. So I really appreciate your looking into that and keeping that in mind. Daniel, how about you?
The one series that really delves into trauma, like I said, is my Alpha World series, and that's a man who is going through who isn't in touch with reality anymore, and the fact that what he fully believes happened in his past is not the truth of reality of what actually happened. So the whole story is a healing process of him coming to grips with what his past and history was over one very specific dark moment of his life. And then the people that are around him who also have moments of personal trauma that have to be dealt with. The whole series was written as a story of let's take a spotlight, but not try to force people to deal with the emotional trauma themselves. But let's just remind people that all these different types of mental illnesses are out there, and there are good and positive ways you can work through them yourselves or help a loved one work through them. And the series just happens to be set in a full dive video game. But knowing people who've gone through major dissociative events and PTSD, it's something that I didn't see a lot of back 6-7 years ago that I wanted to put out there. People should know, recognize that because somebody acts a certain way, there might be a deeper reason for it. It's not just them, being an asshole to you for no reason. Try to be a little more empathetic and try to understand people's points of view. And then at the same time, if they're just going to continue to be an asshole, then, slap them in the face. At times you have to. Travis's series, though, the things Jason has gone through and the way he's helped his main character work through them. I happen to have the next book on pre-order, and I'll patiently, and I say that with quotes around it, wait for it to come out to read it, because Jason is one of the better, well-written characters who has gone through emotional and physical trauma, and Travis has done a good job of showing the different ways that people can try to not deal with it and then have to eventually deal with it too. I have nothing but praise for the way that Travis has portrayed Jason trying to overcome the things that he's had to deal with. So.
That's excellent. Thank you, Daniel.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, because
right.
one of the things I try to do is depict that it's not, and this is something you do because you're doing a long series, is that it's not just like a straight line to recovery either. So because sort of reaches this sort of mental lowest point and starts coming away from that, but it's all fits and starts, and there's a lot of regression and backsliding, and it was important that I depict that, even if that's not always sort of the most popular aspect. But I think it's important that it's not just okay, here's the correct solution, apply it, and everything will just get better now.
No, it's very accurate, though, Travis.
That will get you plenty of critiques, though, too. But I truly appreciate it because you can't will yourself to be better. It's not it's not as simple as that. It's a whole process. And I as much as Jason annoys me sometimes, I do appreciate the path that he's gone down. So, uh, one of the things as I was thinking about this subject, I realized that virtually every one of my series has a different type of mental trauma, whether it's in Life in Exile. A lot of it is parents watching their children go through hardships. A mother coming to grips with the fact that her children actually have to fight monsters if she wants to let them live. And it's rough. And um, we had a daughter die 8 years ago, and it's not something that you can readily put into words or something that you can convey. But there were moments that I was writing those that it was very much a self therapy for me in dealing with these things when they're watching their son fight and see him being injured, and even knowing that they have magic to heal him and all of these things. In that instant, nothing is going to take away that trauma. And the in the series, I get probably more complaints about the mother's character because she really takes till the end of book 3 at least to even accept that she has to somehow think differently than she did on Earth, and she's going to have to adapt to this. And somewhere in book 4, she really kind of makes that transition. People I've received both support and criticism for that character for those reasons, because it's not a quick and easy path. And every time that she decides to take some steps forward, she then goes back, and along with it is her whole we can show these people a better way to live sort of thing. So it gets tangled up, as in, instead of trying to deal with my stuff, I'm going to try to deal with everybody else's stuff. And I think that's an important component for our characters, that they have to be allowed to deal with their stuff, not just save the world.
All very, very excellent points. I'm really glad that we have you guys here to talk about these things, because it's something that does need to be discussed in how this is doing, because it's not just characters that are having this done. It's not just something pen and paper. It's literally us as writers channeling emotions into these they can be very real people, in the same sense that we are personifying true human emotions into a character itself, to explain how there is a process, there is something that you need to go through, that it's not just living with different forms of mental illnesses that we go through, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, whatever the different types of mental disease that you want to personify in this. It's something that's very strongly put through to these characters to show that there is a way through, there is a life past the things that you're experiencing. But to kind of single in on just one of the emotions for a moment, something that I know a lot of people experience when reading through a books is death of a character. So when you have a character die, somebody that you've gotten attached to, that the main character's gotten attached to, the readers have gotten attached to, how do you ensure that those feelings really come through in a way that isn't just absolutely tearing the main characters or the party apart if they've lost somebody that they've loved while going through that? I'm going to start, Daniel, with you on this time.
Well, I have killed a number of main love interests in some of my series. At the end of some books, in fact, and people were very upset with me that the next book wasn't out for 7-8 months in that series. I am just an after action reporter, though. I just write what my characters tell me happened. So when they died, there was the trauma that happens where you have to, the other partners in the relationship are trying to come to a realization of, what do we do without them here? These are integral people we love, and you turn and they're no longer there to talk to. Having lost one of my lovers of, I think she was 11 years when she passed on me a couple of decades ago now. It's hard having that person by your side for a long time and then no longer being able to turn to them. Now I cheated in that series, and there was a plane because there was a god involved, and they could go and still see them and talk to them. So I did cheat, but the emotional impact of having them ripped away, it's still something that people deal with on a daily basis. Grandmother dies, a lover dies, a child dies. It's painful, and being reminded of that in a story sometimes can break a series. Other times it gives catharsis to somebody who's experienced it and can see it happen to a character that they love. Seeing Sean go through and lose two of his wives, I've had a couple of fans reach out and say, hey, I was going through something similar, and that helped me gain a little more perspective on it's not just me, I'm not alone. And sometimes that's what you need when you're going through your own mental headspaces. You need that reach out from somebody else, even if it's just a book character, to show you that it's okay to need help, and other people are also experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, excellent points. Rachel, I'm going to pass this to you for a second.
Well, first off, Sean and Daniel, thank you for sharing that. It's really, I don't think it's something we talk about a lot, is about our own experiences, especially maybe darker ones, and how they shape our writing. But it's something that is so incredibly cathartic, and it's very important for us to do so authentically, not only for ourselves, but for the people reading it. And I think there's a great power in that. And it's something I look back on, I don't know about you lot, but definitely as a teen and in my 20s, even when things got really rough, having a fantasy world to escape to, and even having a place where someone was going through something similar I was going through. It didn't matter if they were on a fucking cloud or if they were in a magical kingdom far away. Having that absolutely kind of helped me feel less alone. And I have forgotten the original question. What was the original question?
The original question was basically where you're going through, is dealing with having your characters deal with the emotional loss specifically of a character that they loved or were close to or dear to.
So I kill a lot of characters. I'll be honest. I'm not a Sarah J. Maas and there's plot armor. I am a George R. R. Martin. And how I deal with that is you see the aftermath. It's not just they die and then you move on. How will this affect people later on? How will they grieve? Do they have time to do so? Can they just move on? And I think the way of doing this, is showing respect to the character. And I think that's how you do it, and show the grief in a way that doesn't dominate the book, but affects in small ripples throughout the rest of their lives. And I think that's the way to do it. People who just have a cry and then they're fine. You don't believe that when you're reading it. It's always something that bugs me when I see it in books. It's sorry, you would absolutely not just get over this. I will never, when Rufio dies in Hook, I fucking love that movie. But when Rufio dies and then Peter Pan is sad for 2 seconds and then he absolutely carries on, you don't believe it. Absolutely not. It breaks the immersion. So I think it's that, having the ripples go on and affect people in other ways. I think that's the way, even if fans get mad at you because somebody died, it's exactly as Daniel said. We are just, the characters are telling us what happens, and all these people die because of their own actions, because this is the story we're telling.
Excellent. Appreciate you sharing that with us. It's definitely some good points to have on there to make sure that you know that it is something that happens, and you have to make sure that it's not. It's a good point to bring as well, to make sure that you're not so into it becomes unrealistic, and people will suspend their belief in the story for a while, because it does have to continue on to tell that rest of that story. Sean, how about I pass that over to you?
So unlike Rachel and Daniel, I don't kill very many characters. I was going through in my head, and I think of people that I would consider to be significant characters. I think I've only killed 3 in 40 books. So I don't kill very many of them. Oh, and one of them got brought back to life. But that was a whole other point in and of itself, because in that particular instance, death really served as this sort of moment for the character to realize that there was more to life than just what he personally was experiencing. The other people were involved, and it wasn't just his problems. And he hadn't actually been very good in that relationship with the woman who died. He had been fairly selfish and fairly absorbed in his own problems, and that it took her death for him to ultimately realize. And it's sort of the you don't know what you have until it's gone. And hopefully we treat the people in our lives better than that. And hopefully we realize that we don't need to be so absorbed in our own crap. And that can be really hard when we are going through whatever anxiety, depression, PTSD, whatever it may be. But everybody's going through their own things. And if we remember that and we interact, it just feels like that's what a mature character needs to do. Our characters, however, are not always mature, and if you always write mature characters, then I don't know what world they live in, because it's not Earth for sure. So for me, it's a lot more of not so much dealing with death, but dealing with the threat of death and the reality of their mortality, especially as they make that transition to, hey, I've got superpowers, and what's the trauma of that. But you probably go through this cycle. Any character probably would. Any person would go through the cycle where first they're scared witless, and then they adapt to it, and then it almost becomes drunk with the fact that they can do all these things that they couldn't do, especially when they're the main character, and they get a little better of everything than anybody else does. Yeah, it seems cool. That's something else I will applaud Travis for. His main character definitely gets a little better than the other people, but using what he gets is kind of gruesome. It's not clean, easy kills. It's it sort of feels like he's torturing everybody that he fights, which has to be a whole nother level of not just dealing with death of people around him, but dealing with death that he's inflicting himself. So hopefully that answers the question.
It does, definitely, yeah, and it brings up another good point of how people tend to look at the differences of death. I was watching a Netflix documentary where somebody was going through some of the dark tourism places, and there was a distinction that he made between how a lot of first world company or countries view death versus some of the third world countries, where some third world countries will go so far as to celebrate the death as something that they no longer fear, something they need to overcome. Even go so far as to dig up their ancestors to have celebrations of their life later on. Whereas we in most first world countries tend to have a fear of death, almost something that's to be avoided at all costs. There's that constant desire to find youth in what we're going through. So it's interesting to express some of those things in the works as well. Travis, how about I pass this off to you for dealing with death of characters that were close to either the main character, readers, or yourself?
That's a man who's looking for the unmute button.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, my series has a bit of an odd relationship with death, in that there are multiple characters who, spoiler, do return from death, sometimes multiple times, and that is something I was very conscious of in trying to avoid undermining the importance of that. Because I think I completely agree that the depiction of grief and the grieving process and the long-term impact that has on other characters is important. And I tried to show that. One of the ways I did that was, the main characters who die are believed to be dead for quite some time, which gives the other characters time to sort of go through that grieving process. But there are also characters who die permanently, and I tried to explore that a bit. But there's also ways you can use, fantasy magic for a level of catharsis. I have a section where some people die permanently, but there is that sort of moment of using magic to getting the chance to say goodbye that so many people like wish they had in the real world. So it's a very funereal kind of situation where you're effectively talking to ghosts. And I tried to make that sort of respectful and cathartic. But yeah, the impact of grief, I think, has to be shown to have that impact, or everything just becomes hollow. Because and there's also that balance, because Rachel, you're talking about the escapism aspect of fantasy. That is great, but there also has to be some weight to it, or it just becomes like empty. So you don't feel like you're escaping to somewhere real if you don't get the feeling of sort of consequences. And I think, like most things we're talking about here, we've been talking about balance since the beginning, and I think it really always just comes down to balance.
Well, Travis, having read a series and not spoiling things, when a specific character dies in your series, the other members of that party go off and do other things. They don't try to keep going on with what they had known before. And I think that was a very good moment, because it shows, I mean, that's life. When someone you care about dies and they're one of the people who keeps you together with a group of friends fracture sometimes. They go off and go do their own things. And they might keep in touch, but they're not trying to continue to do the thing that they've done for the last, decade with each other. And I think that's vague enough without spoilering things for people who haven't read your book. And if you haven't read his book, what are you waiting for? Go read Who Fights with Monsters.
But for people who have read it, we know exactly what you're talking about, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, because I've seen TV shows and stuff where someone will get written out of a series, and then bang, not only are they gone, but there's someone who's mysteriously extremely similar all of a sudden showing up to fill that slot, and it's all good. And yeah,
somehow that never happens in real life, though.
Yeah.
Oh, you're trying to swap out the kid's puppy to try and sort of short circuit the grief process and just hope they don't notice it's a different dog. Which probably not a great plan. I don't know anyone who's actually tried that.
I selfishly wait. Have I jumped the gun again? I did this on last panel.
Yep,
I selfishly saw a question. Oh, did we lose Ryan?
No, I'm good. Can you guys still hear me? I might be having a tiny internet issue as well going through.
I heard, can you guys hear me?
And of course it is. Yeah, if you're able to still understand what I'm saying, at least I can move forward with asking questions, even if you can't see me moving.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. You're back again,
Perfect.
Man. Don't worry.
Then we did have a question come in from Sharon. Yeah, we did have a question come from Sharon that was asking, how do you deal with mental issues in the villain, and how does that differ from other characters, such as the main characters or good guys or whatever the case is? I'm going to pass this off to Sean first.
Unmute, then talk. It's got to get that order right. So how do I deal with that? So interestingly, I guess the mental health of a villain that I would be most interested would be one that was written in one of my alter egos books. I also have some books under the pen name David Burke, which fall more into Daniel's wheelhouse. But one of the villains or villainesses, it goes through this whole mental health of being tortured by their parent figure if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't want to say too much about it, but they're supposed to play this role of the villain, and they have pressure from an outside source putting that in. And so I really love interludes in books, where especially books that are first person perspective. I really love interludes that show a little depth of other characters' perspectives. And when I'm dealing with a villain's mental health, I am looking at it with three questions in mind. The first question I'm looking at is, how long is this villain going to be around? Because if they're not going to be around at the end of the book, then I'm going to handle it differently than if this is a villain who's going to be an ongoing, long-term villain. Secondly, I look at, is this villain going to be redeemed? Is there going to be something that's going to turn this villain around? In that particular instance, there was redemption that came out of it. But if there's going to be redemption, then I have to think about how that's going to, what their actions are going to do later. How are they going to complicate the relationships? Yeah, I killed your dog, stewed your bunny, and now I'm one of your girlfriends. And do all the other girlfriends then accept that that character in that particular scenario? And obviously, there's a whole pressure there. And then the third question that I ask is, I said three questions, didn't I? The third question that I ask is, how does the mental issues that the villain may have, how are they going to directly affect the main character's mental health? Because if your villain is pretty whack and is the Joker, then Batman's mental health is clearly going to be affected by the Joker's mental health. But if it's separate, if it's at an arm's length and they're just a cold, conniving villain, then you're going to operate in a different. They may have their own personal problems, but the readers aren't going to care about that unless it really impacts on the main character's mental health, at least not in the same way. So, okay.
That makes sense. Thank you. Travis, how about you for the second?
Okay, so when it comes to mental health and villains, the one thing I absolutely want to avoid most of all is sort of blaming evil on mental health problems. Like just using that as a way to say, and this is why they're maniacally on a puppy slaughtering spree. But I think obviously a good villain needs to have mentality behind that. And two of my early villains are pretty depraved guys. They're all about power and control. And, they're sort of very petty in their objectives about wanting to just control a certain character, just like claim and break them like a horse. And that's not so much about like mental health problems as sort of very negative behavioral impulses that, rather than being an environment that has attempted to like sort of amend them and give them personal growth, has reinforced the negative behaviors to the point where it becomes more self-indulgent. And but it's not actual mental health. It's just their personal growth has gone in very terrible ways. I do have a more ongoing villain who has, but who's very inhuman in nature, who has demonstrated very sort of erratic behavior, and there is sort of mental health things that I am not done exploring. It's sort of more of a long-term thing, but. And that is, an intrinsic part of their character, and it's tied into their behavior, but it's not responsible for their behavior. And there's also the idea of, there are mental health issues and they can drive you towards certain destructive behaviors, but there also has to be a level of responsibility there where you can't use that as an excuse. Like, mental health doesn't make you evil. It can make you do some destructive things sometimes, but ultimately there has to be a level of responsibility there. You can't just say, mental health problems, they're not in control of their own actions. I think that is actually a really harmful message about taking away agency from people, basically saying, if you've got mental health problems, then you aren't in control. And while it can be hard, I think it's an important message that just having mental health issues doesn't mean you have to go down this destructive path. It doesn't mean you have to be evil, and it doesn't mean on a more grounded level that you can't be responsible for your own life. And that's sort of the approach I take. Because with villains, they're obviously the bad guy, they're antagonistic forces, and they have to be confronted and stopped. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm essentially saying mental health equals bad. Yeah,
and it's a very fine point to make on that. Yeah, we know that nowadays, I don't know, I can say this for the States, I can't say this about for every other country that you guys are from necessarily, but I can say from the States, a lot of times we see people being painted in this negative light as a criminal simply because of their mental illness or their issues, or someone has a mental insanity plea that they're looking to use for as a cop-out even for some of the crimes that they may have committed as well. So it's a fine line to walk in there to make sure that you're really portraying this as somebody who's evil and not, just somebody who's blaming all their problems on a mental illness.
Doesn't that also include the villain who doesn't really see themselves as a villain?
How many villains actually see themselves as a villain, though? Most villains still see themselves as the hero of their own story.
I agree. And Travis is one of his early villains, is very much emotionally unstable in that he thinks he's entitled to everything that he wants. And, I almost question sometimes whether if there's a difference between mental health and emotional health, but I'm not qualified to parse out the differences. But I thought that was a really good character that Travis had, who was clearly a villain, but didn't see it like that at all. So.
It is something that you have to.
Yeah, so I have these two characters quite early on. They're both sort of very privileged young noblemen, and they have essentially the same upbringing in the same place, with parental figures trying to drive them towards the same end. And one of them becomes, an obnoxious little monster, and the other one becomes this character is all driven by duty and honor. And that was a very deliberate contrast, because one of the things I like to do with, some of my villains, especially my more obnoxious ones, is have them as like a counterpoint to my characters. Like, my most weaselly and obnoxious little nobleman villain is in many ways a reflection of my main character. Like, they're both very quick to sort of run their mouth and maybe not be the nicest to people. And the only real difference there is that my main character is just wittier and more competent. But he's not actually, sort of compared to the early points, any really morally superior. He just comes out of it better because, he's got more wit, he's got more capability, and people love a winner. and that sort of drives the less competent character in a villainous direction, because he feels like the main character is getting the reinforcement that he deserves while he's getting put down. And that just, and he's never great. He just sort of keeps moving from disaster to disaster. But it really started at that point where they weren't that different. But one of them was just better and more accepted, whereas the other one was raised to feel like he should be accepted. And when he wasn't, it kind of sets him off the deep end. And and it's not really, mental health so much as personal growth gone in a really twisted direction.
I have two characters that are both in Aether's. In book one, you meet them both. You have Nick and Hayworth, and they're both basically from the same type of backgrounds. They both are entitled. They came up in magic families, and the way they present themselves throughout book one are two entirely different people. But as the series goes on, you find out that the nice guy isn't a nice guy. He's a narcissistic asshole, and that comes out more and more as he's interacted with him. The guy who is a narcissistic asshole kind of begin with can learn and grow and change and become better than what he looked like to begin with. And that's people. And these are two different ways people can be. But I loved doing that because everyone at the start of it was like, oh, this guy's great, this guy's an asshole. And then when they change, when they become who they are as people, the realization on, oh, maybe I was a little quick to judge them. I should have given them more of a chance to show me who they were, was one of the things I really enjoyed. Because people can change and grow, and other people refuse to change who they are and are very good at hiding who they are until they get the veil of the mask they show to society yanked away from them and have to admit who they are to everyone.
Sorry, but to respond to that, I mean, Daniel, I think that's so true too, that we, as readers, as characters in a book, can jump on a character and make assumptions about them. We can do this with people in real life. And honestly, we may not have any clue what that person has gone through to get to the point that they're at. That doesn't excuse horrible actions, but when the guy cuts us off in traffic and we want to curse about it, I mean, that's not quite the same thing as he goes into town and murders people. Maybe we need to understand what's going on in that guy's head. Maybe he is just an ass, but maybe he's had some things happen that we could be a little more sympathetic to. And to take that the next step, again, we keep talking about Travis's characters, probably because they are so very well known, or Jason is so very well known. But I love how he honestly is an ass and an idiot at first in terms of jumping to conclusions about people. And as he is truly enduring suffering, he becomes more sympathetic to other people's suffering and maybe jumps to conclusions a little bit less. It's not like a switch gets flipped and it's suddenly one or the other, but great progression there.
I'm going to jump in and just be like, I agree with all of you. And also, I love that we're using Jason because indeed he's well known. Because the point I was going to make is one of the things I like about Jason is that he'll admit when he's wrong. When he turns around afterwards and says that. And I think that for me is the biggest difference between a hero and a villain. It's accountability. Because if we're being honest, a lot of the people that maybe are most difficult in our lives or we dislike are often the people who it's never their fault. It's always a product of circumstance. Someone else did this. They'll never turn around and say, no, I fucked up. And I think for me, if we want to take it on a grander, fantastical scale, and you multiply that by 1,000%, that's how you get an awful villain. That's how you get someone who will turn around and at the end of the day, they're not the villain of their story. They're a product of circumstance. And I think there's different ways to handle that. I completely agree that I think just being like, oh, they're crazy or they have a mental illness and that's why they do this. That I think that's really irresponsible. One of the best cases I've seen, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, is one of the best representations of schizophrenia I've ever seen in media, and they did a tremendous amount of research on that. So I think unless you are really familiar with something, it's kind of irresponsible to be like, this is what the whole thing is. But I think what we can do about our villains is, one, get in their heads. I love doing that with mine personally. There was a reason I also did the villains panel. I love getting in the villain's head. And just because you understand where they're coming from, that doesn't mean that's an excuse for what they're doing. It means you can have empathy for them, but you can still think they're a dick. And I think that's my favorite thing about writing villains and coming at things from at least trying to an empathetic point of view.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
it's really-
true because yeah, so there's Marvel movies have sort of a villain problem where they have these incredibly empathetic characters who have, you know, extremely valid points, but instead of sort of being trying to say they have these valid points, but here are issues to deal with, they go, yes, they have this valid points, except now they're going to start burning down houses and murdering everyone, so they have to be stopped, and let's not address those points at all.
And it's like they were so close. It's like you had something. If you just went with it, you had it. But then you decided, like,
yeah, no, I need to set fire to all the puppies. Like, you know, which is completely separate from my socioeconomic views, but let's not talk about those anymore because I murdered all those puppies. And yeah, I think that's bad because what you're saying about accepting consequences is very much like something I consciously choose when I'm differentiating my, you know, protagonists from my villains. Like, you know, there's a sense of entitlement or feeling that their trauma sort of is justification for everything they do when it's not. It's horrible, and you have to deal with that, but you don't get to deal with that by returning that trauma onto other people, which is actually sort of something my main character has to, you know, go through and sort of deal with once he starts messing up at his darkest moments and realizing that he's gone way off the rails.
Yeah, it's really important to note
that's
that
an
distinction
example of-
between the choices you make.
Absolutely. That's an example of not mental health, but character growth, learning to accept those decisions and not take it out on everybody else. So
Yeah. We're getting close to the time. I'm going to ask one more question. When we get to the last 5 minutes, I'll make sure I get everybody a chance to add their stuff in. In fact, let's do that now, because then we can answer a question. If we run out of time, I can just cut you all off. So let's give a chance for one more time at the end of the panel here. We'll let you guys plug in your works to make sure that we get that in for everybody who's joined in late, because I have been seeing some people mentioning they apologize, they joined in later than they could. Rachel, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you have upcoming and the kind of things you're working on and what you're excited about?
So my trilogy, Knights of Eternity, is coming out next year. I am so incredibly proud and excited of it. And honestly, even if no one buys it, I will still be proud that I did this. And that is what I am most excited about.
Awesome. And you should be. You should always be proud of being able to do something that a lot of people won't be able to say they've been able to do before. Travis, how about you next?
Okay, I've got my next book, He Who Fights with Monsters 10. Oh, God, there's 10. So, yeah, and I'm looking at these guys. They're like, what do you mean 10? I did 10 today. Like, but yeah, book 10 is coming out 28th of November. And I've got some sort of promo stuff coming before then. Some interesting stuff that's not quite ready to be revealed, but leading into the next book should be quite a lot of fun.
Excellent. Daniel, how about you next?
My next book to get published is actually going to be in like 2 days. It's on the 25th of this month. That is going to be Lux Voice 7, Rail Laid Plans. That is my weird Western. The man sent to an alternate world that is Western with magic and fantasy races sent by the goddess of luck to try to bring the word of the gods back to the world before it's killed by the forces of entropy that snuff life out on all planets. Um, 7 books in, it's going fairly well. And Travis, don't feel bad. You're like 10 is like still like half my catalog if you go by just words written. So it's okay, man. It's okay. It's not sometimes it's not about the numbers overall. It's just about like quality as well. Okay, your quality still vastly surpasses a lot of other authors who might have published like 200 books. So it's okay. You're good there. If you want to find my books, though, just Daniel Shinhofen on Amazon. You'll find my entire catalog from Celtic mythology series to Weird West to Magic Academy cultivation and so on and so forth. Because I touch a lot of different things. I don't leave. I don't have just one niche outside of multi-partner romance. So
Excellent. Thanks, Daniel. And Sean, how about you?
Okay, so November 7th, book one of a new post-apocalyptic series is coming out. Induction, Welcome to the Multiverse. It is what happened. I basically all my series start with a question for me. So, what happens if the apocalypse is coming, but only a few people know? And so, what are you doing? And he's got the system before anyway. Then I've also got Dragon Sorcerer 4 coming out in December. And my pen name is going to compete with Travis for the release on compete, haha. I will be releasing Crystal Core, which will be book one of a new David Burke series on November 28th or whatever it is. And hopefully, fingers crossed, because I don't control this. Life in Exile book 7 will come out before the end of the year. I have to finish writing it. I control that part of it, but the publisher does control the release date. And they're probably looking at me. If they were looking at me, they'd be saying, "What are you talking about? It's October and you're not even finished done writing, and you want me to publish it before the end of the year?" Anyway, so thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Sean. Since we do have just a few minutes left, I do want to read one of these questions here from TJ. It's what are some of the ways that you towards pointing the character going through this rather than telling the reader about the process they go through? Since I don't know if I've started with you yet, Travis, let's start with you on this one.
I mean, it really comes down to just behavior. And because a large theme of how I address mental health is through, treatment, like help from other people, be that just friends or actual like mental health professionals. So what I tend to do is try and, show the behaviors that are depicting that, but then as I go through that process of people getting support, getting care, getting help, that's when I sort of take everything and try to make it more explicit after I've sort of, done the showing. So it's a case of where I try to show and then tell, which is probably not an ideal approach to writing in general. But I think it's a good way to address mental health issues, because it's important that you as part of a healing process, that you dig out these behaviors and you do take them out and look at them and see what they mean for you, and whether there's positivity or negative aspects to them, but they need to be sort of explored in an explicit fashion, and I try to depict that in a fairly therapeutic way.
Perfect. And with just a minute left, Daniel, do you want to give us any thoughts on that as well?
No,
No pressure.
Travis does an amazing job with, I think, showing the different steps that can happen when a main character goes through trauma. I mean, Jason's first reaction, in my opinion, was deflecting behind humor. I could be wrong. Travis will correct me, but that's a fallback a lot of people have. When you get hurt, you try to deflect and get other people to laugh. If other people are laughing, it might not hurt as bad, and a lot of people do that. I have a new series that'll be coming out next year where the main character, big, burly, strong man, and he's going to be seeing a therapist regularly because sometimes you just need help. And with his background and what he went through, which will come out, it's a good thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't matter if you're 500 pounds all muscle and can lift planets. Sometimes you just need to be able to unburden yourself with somebody, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Excellent thoughts. Well, we have reached the hour now, and I want to again say thank you guys for spending your time with us. We know that each and every one of you's time is very valuable and could be spent doing other things, and I want to show you some true appreciation for taking that time out and being here with us. So thank you so much for being here with us. If anybody has additional questions or wants to talk, we do have a Discord chat where questions can be posted and the authors can go in and answer those questions for you guys as well. Again, I want to thank you guys for coming out. I want to thank especially Geneva for putting up with all of this, especially going through some of the technical difficulties we've had during the panel. But you guys have been truly amazing. And for the sign off for today, why don't we go ahead and give everybody one last little wave, and we'll say goodbye. And thank you guys for joining us. We do have a takeover coming up next. So thank you guys for coming to see us.